Okay, thank you. So why don't we begin with the minutes? Can we approve the minutes?
Can we say, so we would be approving last month's, is that?
That's correct,
Because
yes.
we don't have anything else to approve at this point, do we?
That's correct. We're all called up now.
Oh,
So
okay.
the October minutes.
Okay.
Okay, any concerns about that? We can accept the minutes? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we'll do that. And then I guess we go next to the status of command report.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. As always, I appreciate everybody's time. In the interest of saving some time, I see we have a big agenda. Personnel has pretty much stayed the same. There's no changes there from last month. The same with the fleet. There's no changes there from last month either. Moving downward into municipal police officer education and training certifications. We are currently still in process with motor emergency vehicle operations training at the Montgomery County Public Safety Academy. Just a couple more officers to finish up, and we have firearms training at the Montgomery County Public Safety Academy, just a couple more officers. As a matter of fact, I think it's only one to finish up. And moving down into the next category, other training certifications and information. So one of the concerns always for the committee here each month is the coverage from Lower Merion. We had a slight increase in October versus September of only 3 hours. We're expecting a significant drop in November from a comparison to October. Completed training, we have completed a lot of training during the past few months. Duty to intervene in June, report writing in June, perception of danger in June, conducting the complete traffic stop in August, high-risk vehicle investigations in August, street cop training, which was a conference down in Atlantic City. 2 officers went. That was the week of October the 4th. The Mid-Atlantic Association of Women in Law Enforcement, that was Officer Kelly Lynn went to that training. That was on the week of October the 11th. And upcoming scheduled training right now is we have police supervisory in-service training scheduled for Sergeant Mike Vernaccio in April of 2022. That'll be included within the budget for next year. Right now, our training line, our budget line is just about exhausted. We have used our funds. So we did pretty good this year as we start to close out the year for training. We had a lot of training components that we used. And some of this stuff covered some implicit bias and avoid stereotyping and profiling in the high-risk vehicle investigations, as well as the complete traffic stop, which was done by Sergeant Mike Vernaccio, and then he transferred that information to the officers. So it was a great training, a past few months of training for us since the summer. I challenge any other organization our size to be committed to that for such a short period of time and still continue with the rest of our operations. So I think we did a great job. And again, the sergeants in service training is going to be coming up. But the one thing I would like to talk about before we close out the status of command report, that last Wednesday on the 27th and on Thursday the 28th, in response to some of these concerns that we have for traffic, absent the device that Samantha and I currently used in tandem together, we went out there and conducted our own traffic initiative. So we operated this on last Wednesday and last Thursday. Officer Sean McCabe and Officer Dan Dutton did a tremendous job. So they were only operating between the hours of 3:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. on both days for this traffic initiative because they had other responsibilities that they had to fulfill for the rest of the shift. But in only 6 hours between 2 days, these officers conducted 7 car stops, resulted in 3 hazardous moving violations, 2 non-hazardous moving violations, and 5 traffic-related warnings. So they generated 10 pieces of activity in a 6-hour time frame, and out of 7 car stops. They handled it well. I was out there and I witnessed 2 of them personally, and they were very professional, and the application was seamless, and it was definitely, in my opinion, it sent a traffic calming feel throughout the rest of the borough because the officers were out there with their lights, with their sirens engaged, and they were stopping everybody that they possibly could that was in violation of the traffic law. So it was a very successful initiative, and we're hoping to run probably at least once a month moving forward as we start to plan things out.
Okay, thank you, John. I know we'll come back to you in a little bit.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go to the LED street light. Samantha, did you want to update that?
Sure, absolutely. So we're just about there with all the lights being converted over. Not all of them have. Mike Kennedy from our Public Works Department actually went around the borough last week and documented where the lights haven't been converted over at. And this week that list was sent over to our lighting consultant. I asked our lighting consultant for a phone call later this week or early next week to pal out about addressing the concerns we've received about light brightness, as well as to get a timetable for when the remaining lights are going to be converted. So we're just about there. I anticipate, definitely by the end of the month, having all the lights converted over, and I anticipate, at the end of by the end of this month, starting the process of evaluating the concerns that came in about light brightness, and probably then sometime in December, directly addressing those concerns.
Okay, so to our neighbors, if you've sent in complaints, we have heard you, and our manager has a plan. So thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely.
Just real quick, question. In it, I know the lights are dimmable, right? Correct. And are there shields available to kind of focus the light in certain directions? I've gotten that question.
Yeah, there are, and actually part of why the timetable is so long to deal with this is because we actually have to order the shields. Well, we're appropriate to order the shields, and I think everyone has experienced lately, trying to order and get anything anywhere is much more difficult than it used to be. So we'll have to order the shields and get them in before we can start using them. But that does exist, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so should we go next to the EV charger?
Sure. So I spoke with Flow, our charging partner, about their suggestions and thoughts about moving forward with this. The biggest thing that myself and Flow wanted to do is follow up with Pico to ask them if either the borough or a private resident put in one of the chargers that we talked about last month that is on a residential street, how that would work with the electric account, whether it could be tied into the existing street lights or utility poles, or whether it would have to be run from the private property. Because if it has to be run from a private property, then we get into the concerns about, well, is that going to run through the sidewalk, or how is that going to work, and issues like that. So we're trying to get a meeting with Pico, and I think once we do that, we'll have a lot more information in terms of how it would work and what the potential cost to either the borough or a private property owner would be. Because if the borough and private property owners can connect to an existing utility pole, that's a much cheaper installation than potentially having to do any digging on the property.
Okay. Good. Okay, thank you for looking into that.
Yeah, so more to come, and I couldn't find your packet here, but just as an FYI, I did, after the last infrastructure meeting, shared with the members of that, I took a quick look at the statistics on the usage of the existing chargers, and for the 3 weeks in October I looked at, they're getting a fair amount of use. The charger here at the Municipal lot had gotten 72 hours of use, and the one over on Essex had gotten 59 hours of use. So, people are definitely taking advantage of them, which is great. That's why we have them.
That's over 3 weeks.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah, those are very encouraging numbers, because a full charge might be 4 hours.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of different households. So, okay. Well, why don't we discuss the body cameras that the chief wanted to request, and then we could, I know there's a lot on this agenda, so we'll have to kind of keep our eye on the clock. Yeah, go ahead, chief.
So, Samantha and I have been discussing this for a while. The mayor and I have discussed this as well. We presented this information to Borough Council at different times during the past 3.5 years, as well as the Public Safety Committee in its previous life. So with the body-worn cameras, we have a proposal for basically a joint join up with new tasers. To let everybody right now know that we have Lower Merion has, and thanks to Lower Merion Police Department and Superintendent McGrath, the officers over there, they have given us 2 tasers on loan until we get our new tasers in place, which is very good because our tasers became outdated and old. So we're looking at 2 brand new tasers and maybe more T7s to bring in. But however, with body worn cameras, they're connected. So in other words, when those tasers break a holster, they break leather, the body worn camera automatically goes on. In addition to that, the holsters that they have, the taser itself will actually shut off the minute that that taser is returned right back to the holster. It clips the taser off, so there is no accidental discharges. So it's a very, very good, it's a very efficient system. I like the new, the Axon program where they have the tasers connected to the body-worn cameras. The body-worn cameras help insulate the borough from liability, frivolous accusations, the officers, it protects them as well. It really can change people's behavior the minute you tell them that they're on camera. During a car stop or an interaction with police, it has somewhat of a calming effect on them. So I like body-worn cameras. It's definitely the rage in law enforcement. We are kind of behind the curve. West Conshohocken has recently submitted a request for body-worn cameras, but to Samantha's credit, she has found a couple options and alternatives for grants to actually help us pay for the body-worn cameras. So she has presented information to me where we just kind of connect with the tasers and then get a the body-worn camera grant application going, and we kind of visit and marry those 2 up at some point in time. I'll be glad to turn it over to you, Samantha.
Yeah, maybe, Chief, if you could speak to, because you might know better than me, not just what the benefits to the department are of the body-worn cameras, but what the benefits are to the community with the officers having them as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can tell you right now, we already have mobile video recorders. So when we stop a car or we have interaction, there's a significant portion of that interaction that is already recorded by our mobile video recorders in the cars. And that also has an audio function. But however, body-worn cameras include, covers all contacts. I think the benefit to the public is overall that if they have a complaint against a police officer and that interaction is recorded, you can pull that interaction, it's saved, all right, and we have that, we can pull it up and we can see what the exact interaction is. And it'll help us investigate complaints against police if we have one filed. In addition to that, it also is great for court purposes. We have the interaction recorded. If that leads to an arrest, that information is presented in discovery for a criminal court proceeding. In this day and age across the country, body-worn cameras, again, are basically the status quo. They are the standard. They are the state-of-the-art technology that every police department is using across the entire nation. So, again...
Are there any incidents that prompted this request, any complaints within the borough?
No. Rob, I can honestly say that this is basically an initiative that we're trying to take on to make sure that we're up to standards in the industry itself. Probably within Montgomery County, there's a handful of municipalities that don't have body-worn cameras, but I can tell you that the work is in progress for the most part. The last one I heard of was, again, West Conshohocken, and we kind of compare ourselves a lot to them just based on size. And there's options and alternatives from grants to get these body-worn cameras into place. I'm a big supporter of them. I think they work tremendously. As a matter of fact, when they first came out a long time ago, officers were somewhat opposed to them. They didn't like them when I was in the Philadelphia Police Department. And now officers want body-worn cameras. They want it for the protection. They want it to basically justify what they've done, the action that they've taken, the professional standards that they try to meet. Basically documents that, it memorializes that.
So if we look at a 3-year, say block of time, say January 2019 through December 2021, which we're coming up on, would you say there have been 0 complaints against police in that time that would have, where a body-worn camera would have helped?
Believe it or not, most of the complaints, Bob, that we have gotten about police personnel have been against non-sworn personnel. It's not officer related.
Okay. So I'm wondering if we could, if that becomes an issue for us, if then we can look at that equipment at that time.
Well,
And partly, unless there's a way to.
Yes, I guess,
But I actually have before you go and talk
Sure.
about funding, I guess.
well, there's
I
one
wanna-
thing I want to throw out there too.
Well, I just want to ask about, because you brought up the tasers and the body worn cameras. There's another piece of equipment that I've been wondering about since the chair of since Barbara convened the ad hoc parking committee, which is this piece of equipment that can identify the owner of a vehicle by their tag, and I think maybe the parking controller has one.
Well, are you talking about a license plate reader, an automatic license
Yeah.
plate reader, an
Yeah.
ALPR?
Yeah, I'm talking about whatever the parking controller has.
That's something separate. That's from United Public Safety. We can get that. She doesn't have the component, the layover component, the parking controller. It doesn't have that ability, to the best of my knowledge, that it can't just read tags. We have an LPR that can license plate reader that can read tags on one of our police cars. It was given to us on a grant by the Pennsylvania Auto Theft Prevention Authority, probably I would say more than 2 years ago.
Okay, because I'm wondering if just as we looked at the perspective of enforcement of parking enforcement from the perspective of the committee, I began to wonder about if the police officers have enough appropriate technology in hand to say enforce parking conditions, because without having to call a controller, if they see something, if they can easily just scan up, produce.
We have a device. We have a device, but most of the calls.
Do you have enough devices for the department?
Yeah, we have a device for an officer on patrol. We have 2 devices total in the department.
So that one for the parking controller and one for.
And one for the officer on duty.
Does the officer on duty always have that with them in the car?
Right now, we don't use it because the parking controller is usually out there Monday through Friday. The officers will take it out there on a case-by-case basis. But we also have an option for a paper citation as well.
Okay.
Bob, just to let you know, so most of the calls that we get for parking and go through county radio are about blocked driveways.
Okay, but I mean, beyond calls, it seems to me that that's the kind of technology that would be really in high demand and used, because there's frequently, things going on with parking and enforcement.
Well, we already have that device. We do have that.
And maybe the LPR, but that's what I wanted to ask about, because it's an additional piece of equipment that I know that from the perspective of the ad hoc parking committee, we'd like to see that
Mhm.
happen.
And we can eventually use that device to actually issue traffic citations. We can actually get UPS to convert that
So-
device for us.
Yeah, so maybe back to body worn cameras.
Mhm.
What I was gonna say was, I guess I'd rather see, from my perspective administratively, I defer to the chief in regards to police operations, but in general, try to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And I've tried to educate myself a little bit on body worn cameras. And some of the stuff that I've read, the research is still ongoing. And thankfully, this has not been a problem under Chief Gallagher, but that they could potentially reduce instances of use of force from officers. So not only would body-worn cameras potentially protect the department if there ever was an issue, but more importantly for our residents. And thankfully, again, we have, officers who've not, again, Chief Gallagher done a great job with this police department. But, the body-worn, you never know what chief or what officers or who all we're going to have around here, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Body-worn cameras potentially reduce use of force by officers. So I see it as both a proactive and a reactive solution for the borough as well.
Could
Barbara?
I ask a question? So when I look at this, and I have to say, rather than reading the whole document, I went just to the recommendations because I thought, okay, it's a long document. But one of the things that occurred to me is that I feel a little bit like we're putting the cart before the horse. Like, I want to know the policies that the borough is going to have. This has a lot of recommendations about what your policies might be, but I don't know what our policy would be. And so, when would we want the officers to turn them on? When would we want them to turn them off? How would we store this? How long would we store it? Who would have access to it? I feel like we need to answer all of those questions and have, a sense that everyone on council is comfortable with that, and maybe there's, certainly we would want there to be an opportunity for residents to have input into that, their comments about how they felt about these different things. I mean, this is, this is a pretty big deal to do something like this in our small community. Before we decide, oh, let's go get money, grant money or whatever, because if we get grant money, then we have to buy it, because you can't use it on anything else. So I sort of feel a little bit like, okay, this is a great start in knowing this, but then I feel like, gee, shouldn't we do the policies first? So even if it's not nitty gritty down to but broad strokes about this is how we want to set this up in our.
Sure, and that makes perfect sense. And I think overall that the best thing to understand is that there's model policies for body worn camera application from the Pennsylvania Chiefs Association that we partake in. There's a model policy that the Lower Merion Police Department has. Now, we do basic training services with Lower Merion. So with that in mind, it's in our best interest probably to look at that, even though we may have our own hybrid version of our own policy affecting our own community with our own characteristics. But we really have to use some of those model policies to formulate our own plan. And I don't think it's a bad idea at all. But however, the one thing that we have to take into consideration overall is Samantha was mentioning something that was very important. And it's really about how it reduces the incidence of use of force. And that's a lot of truth to that. And the reason being is because the guardrails are up and the officers realize that they have to stay within that policy that we establish.
Yeah, I mean, I think, our role as an elected body, this committee, is really to provide some oversight over the budget. So my first concern is about the budget, because as you know, we are spending considerable sum on policing. It's increased because of the union contract. Our personnel costs have gone up. So I would hesitate to go forward with the body cameras at this point, because I don't see a proximal cause. I understand that it's the best practice, but I would want, in the report that you shared, it says no community should enter into this decision lightly. And it does seem to me like we have a bit more work we could do on the policy side to really justify this expense. I mean, it seems to me this kind of proactive rationale could be used to justify almost any technology going forward. And I would worry about that, that our police expenditure would then cross 50% of the, total budget. So I feel that we need to be a bit more, we need a bit more time to process the request.
Samantha, could you please explain the grant process, the funds that are available?
Sure. So, well, I guess I'll mention first the cost we're talking about here is, like 10,000 or less per year?
Yeah, it's not that significant. Yeah.
Now, that being said, I do think policy should absolutely be developed, and that sounds like a good next step for me and the chief is to work on that and consider that. The grant provided from the Department of Justice, it was started, I believe, under the Obama administration and continued through the last two administrations we've had. Pays 100% of the cost to acquire them. Now, I imagine there will be certain, subscription costs and that kind of thing for the video storage, but that will be a rather nominal cost, which the chief and I can get the numbers on. So in terms of actual budget expense, we could get 100% of it paid for the initial purchase, and then we would just be responsible for the video storage costs, which the chief and I can find out.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful.
How current is the technology? I mean, like, whenever there's a newish technology, and I realize body-worn cameras aren't that new, but there's always kind of like an initial phase where people are getting working the kinks out of the technology, making sure they work, and then there's kind of like, so you have these intermediary technology, and then it kind of starts to get good, and then eventually you have something that like kind of is very dependable, works all the time, and you're not going to have to replace every 3 years.
You're already at that latest stage.
We are, okay, because I know like after 9/11, like when police communications there was a lot of revision around like communications, regional communications and police interconnectivity. Like the borough spent an obscene amount of money like on radios, and then those radios got thrown away, and we got new radios, and those got new radios, and it's like a lot of money just down the tubes on radios.
Well, in defense of the borough on that one, if Montgomery County is like Bucks County, and I think this is the case, The borough didn't have a choice in
That's
that. That was the county that.
I understand
did
that in this instance, we have a choice about this technology, and if we're gonna, I'm not opposed to body worn cameras, but I also want to look at our other technological needs. I'm particularly interested in the parking enforcement technology. That seems like a great, like zero cost kind of technology because it's paid for by the enforcement action, like by the fines. I'd like to see the officers engaged in supporting the parking enforcement with parking enforcement, not just when they're called, but because they're on the street and they're out there. And it's only with the right technology, it only takes a moment to produce a ticket. Yeah.
So, I realize we have so much on the agenda, and I appreciate John, that you've been asking for this. So, I'm personally not comfortable until we have, as I mentioned, more of a plan for cost containment, right? And the policy that would be needed around the video storage. So that's my position. I don't know if we need to, I would suggest that we share our opinions with the larger council. I know the budget is being made as we speak, so I suppose the whole council could vote on it.
Can I ask a question? Was the intention that this be included in the 2022 budget?
It is not, because the 2022 budget only includes currently for a taser acquisition, because as mentioned, I don't think we're gonna have an answer on this tonight or, at the next council meeting. And then B, like I said, if we did move forward with it, a grant would cover the 100% of the cost of acquisition and initial implementation. So even if we decided, next month or December or early January or something like that, then we apply for the grant, and if we get the grant, great. If we don't get the grant and we still want to do it, we talk about it for the 2023 budget. Or we'd say, unless it's free, we don't want to do it or whatever.
Okay.
Figure out from
I
there.
think we definitely want to look at the recurring costs for that technology, like what the monthly or annual cost is for the subscriptions, but also for the maintenance and upgrading.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the opportunity cost. I don't know the officer time that might be involved in managing all the video feeds.
It's basically a cloud operating system, and the Axon gives packages of 3 years and 5 years, and it's all inclusive. And Samantha's 100% right. Usually the first year covered by grants, it almost covers 100% of it, and then you have to pay annual cost as it moves forward for the rest of the plan.
Here's what we can do, to kind of maybe if I may offer to bring the conversation to a close. The chief and I can, talk about policies. We can figure out what the recurring costs would be, even if we got a grant, and then we can come back and bring that information to the committee.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, I'm relieved. I had assumed because of the timing that you were hoping to get it into this budget.
No,
So I'm relieved that we have more time.
we're just kind of talking out loud.
Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate you bringing it to us, and we'll return to that. Okay, so this next item is something we've been really kind of itching to get to for a long time, this inspection program for commercial properties and residential properties. So, Samantha, do you want to share with us the documents?
Sure. Yeah, it might almost be good to almost maybe somewhat approach them in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
So the Borough Comprehensive Plan, sorry, let me get to these 96 pages of body camera to get to. Okay, here we go. The Borough Comprehensive Plan definitely calls, outright calls to the borough to implement a residential rental registration and inspection program. And in addition to that, I'm also recommending that the borough implement a commercial fire inspection program. The goal basically of both is it's a very basic level inspection that's to ensure minimum safety standards for the benefit of public health. So in prior employment, generally I look for things like, do your smoke alarms work? Do you have anything, blocking your exit? real basic kind of safety stuff. And again, talking at a policy level, if we wanted to move forward, one of the things we would have to do is council would have to approve an ordinance for both of these that would actually list in it what we would be inspecting for. So that way you all and council and the public would be able to see what the inspection entails and understand that it's not this, and not intended to be this grueling sort of thing. It's just, like ensuring basic public safety. And rental inspections, they look for things like, does the heat work, is there a window somewhere in the apartment that works, like things like that. And again, we could put together, if you wanted to move forward with this, we could put together, again, the actual ordinances and regulations, and then you'd be able to, look more in detail at that. But big picture, again, it's basically just an annual program looking at basic life and safety for residential rental properties, especially if all the apartment buildings you already have, and the ones that are going to be built in the next, year to 2 years here. Making sure those are safe. The commercial fire inspection would cover the common areas in those buildings, as well as, in particular, our restaurants and that sort of thing. It's just really intended, again, to prevent fires. And, I know I just said this a minute ago, but be proactive about preventing, any harm to the borough and public safety. Usually there are fees charged as part of these programs. And I did provide, talking with our code enforcement officer and thinking on my own past experience with this, what the recommended fees would be. I'm really on the fence about whether we should charge a fee off the get-go or not. Part of me thinks because they're new programs, maybe we consider not charging the fee. But then also part of me thinks if we start not charging a fee, people might get confused or upset if we then do start charging a fee for them. So that's one of the issues as well we'd have to wrangle with it. But otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions about it.
Thank you.
Would there be different occupancy standards, say fire suppression or fire alarm technology, say for multiple occupancy properties versus say 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, multifamily?
Yeah, so when a building is constructed, yes, absolutely. So when something gets constructed, our saldo and our building code both cover, depending on what type of building it is, the sort of fire suppression systems it has to have. And this inspection would ensure that whatever that system is that had to be put in for those codes is in good working order and operational.
Because we have some older buildings, multifamily buildings in the borough, that might not have the same up-to-date technology according, say, to the most recent International Building Code. And so I'm thinking that, that perhaps they should be upgraded to some extent, but should every multifamily property, say, for example, have to be wired with electronic smoke alarms?
Right.
So I think we just have to look at that, but I'm really in favor of this program. I think this is every rental apartment, large or small, from one to from 2 family units up to hundreds of units should all be required to register their rental properties for the registration program, and I'm in favor of a fee. I think it's perfectly reasonable. It's providing a level of public safety, and it's ensuring that residents who move to the borough, who lease properties here, will have a certain level of, can be assured that the apartment they're leasing is safe.
And I also do want to emphasize too that the borough fire marshal, in addition to the borough code enforcement officer, has recommended these programs be adopted as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to clarify, we could go ahead with what you proposed or do we need to do ordinances?
We would need to do ordinances, so if I got your, general blessing here tonight, the next step would be for me to work with the borough solicitor on an ordinance for a commercial fire inspection program and an ordinance for a residential rental program.
Okay, well, I would support that.
I would love it.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
just
it's
makes
for the good
perfect
of
sense
all
to
of
me.
us.
Yeah.
And this was initiated by Public Health and Safety Committee like maybe 6 years ago.
I think so.
And it's sort of been in the works for a while, so just really appreciate the manager for making this happen.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you, Samantha.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you all for your support on that.
Okay, so I think we go next to snow routes.
Sure, if I may.
Yeah,
All right. So we talked over the last couple meetings about some concerns we got about snow routes, and that was when I discovered that our ordinance regarding snow routes does not match up with the signage for snow routes.
mhm,
So I talked about it with our Public Works foreman, as well as now our Public Works manager, and the recommendation that I got was basically that the ordinance should match the existing signage. They did not feel we should change where the signage currently is. So I have on your list here what our current regulations are and what the proposed regulations would be, which is, you can see, it adds a lot of locations onto it to match our signage. So the other thing I wanted to mention for the committee that's not in the memo is kind of talking about the purpose of the snow emergency routes. My understanding as someone who has never had to plow snow herself, but having been around people who do, is the purpose of snow emergency routes is to keep a travel lane clear for first responders, police, fire, ambulance. And for a lot of the streets on the borough, the reason why parking is barred is because of how narrow a lot of our streets are. When you're trying to plow the snow, you wouldn't be able to plow enough width for those vehicles if you had to worry about hitting someone's car or anything like that. So, for example, part of why Haverford Ave, for example, only is a snow emergency route to Iona is because once you get past that point on Haverford, the parking then, while it is on street, it's on a separate, there's parking carved out on the street for it. So if you just paid plows Haverford through that section, you still have enough width to get those emergency vehicles through. Whereas when you're further up Haverford, if there's cars parked on one side of it, you can't really, the cars are basically parked in the cartway, and hence why those differentiations exist.
mhm.
So there must be no parking on the street between Iona and North Harbor?
Right, yeah,
Okay,
that's
I'm like
right.
trying to picture and,
Yeah. I know that I have the luxury of, that's the route I take to work every day.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Can I ask then about the cul-de-sac Price Avenue? Because that's how you get into Price Crossing now. And I'm like, shouldn't
Yeah.
that also be a snow emergency?
It's a private road.
Yeah, that's why it's not
No. The Price
listed.
Crossing is, but the Price Avenue, the tail end of Price Avenue.
Right, so I think unfortunately, I mean, I'm certainly willing to change this if the committee wants. But I think the reason why it isn't currently a snow emergency route is because since that's a private road, for the purposes of the borough, it's kind of almost like, why do we have to do additional effort for a private road?
I can kind of understand that, but I'm also looking at it from the standpoint of the emergency
Yeah,
vehicles.
it's
How are they
safety,
going
yeah.
to get in there?
Yeah,
Because they cannot make the turn into the emergency drive easily off of Conway. If there is snow, even with, with let's say it's the west side, that's the snow emergency route, the east side is parked
Yeah,
all up. So it would be a challenge for them to turn a fire truck in there.
yeah, if this committee wants to make that change as part of what gets sent to borough council for consideration, I don't think that would be unreasonable.
I'd like to know what the fire department thinks. At least that seems to me to be the
I
right
guess
thing to ask.
I don't know if I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but for forever, it hasn't been a snow emergency route, that cul-de-sac of Price
Yeah.
Avenue. And I don't see why this,
Okay. You
Changes the condition.
didn't have nine dwellings up there. You
but I
only
mean,
had-
also like, I think there's like a lot of parts of, say, the city of Philadelphia that don't do this. And like,
That's okay.
and
I
first
just,
responders get through.
it just-
And I think our first responders are gonna get through.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure why we do it at all, but I think it's nice for the borough that we get nicely plowed roads
Yeah.
because people are willing to move their cars off their snow emergency routes and you get a nicely plowed street. But I don't know that it's really actually like I think our first responders are gonna get to where they need to go,
okay.
frankly.
Hey, I'm responding to what the purpose
Okay.
is, which is to keep a travel lane clear for emergency vehicles. And I'm looking at that saying, well, there is no travel lane clear into that development.
I mean, you ever been in Maniac during a snowstorm?
Bob,
They get the-
that's-
Yeah, no, I'm
we're
just
talking
sharing my
about
view.
not
I'm sharing my
Yeah,
view.
but, also, we had a complaint to this committee about Williams Ave, that those neighbors would like to be removed from the snow emergency
Sure.
list.
That's okay. I just,
So, I don't know how to,
yeah, there
you know,
had
I
just
mean, we
been
have
a
a plan
change.
to improve the plowing in those. And I guess we could amend this list, this ordinance.
And I'm not opposed
Yeah,
to doing it, Barbara, I
council
just
meeting.
think if we're gonna like really look at the borough in a comprehensive way, that would be the job of the public works crew and
And
along with fire department and really make it comprehensive. If we wanna do a comprehensive reassessment, that's one thing, but just to start
Well,
changing it, like I think just it's not efficient to start changing the ordinance.
Bob, I never would have mentioned it if there hadn't been a new development up there. That's what triggered the thought for me. It's solely reacting to that. This is a new development that doesn't have traditional access. So, that's all.
Well, there were people living there before, there were
Yes,
several.
there was,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, no.
I don't see the difference.
Okay, just not as many.
Okay, so,
So I can work with the solicitor on preparing a ordinance for council for updating our snow emergency routes.
okay. All right, thank you. So then the next item is the carbon pricing recommendation from the EAC for internal purchases within the borough government. And the recommendation here is to start with what's called shadow pricing. So when it comes to large purchases, if we can build in a carbon cost for, say, a combustion engine vehicle when comparing to a more efficient alternative.
So my question is, how does that number, that shadow cost number, get from conception to the budget? Like, onto the budget line?
Yeah, I mean,
What are the steps and who does that?
in the first stage, from this recommendation, it would just be, it would be kind of an internal office calculation, maybe with the help of ICLEI, our free consultants. But it may not come to, I mean, I think it would only show up to council in the form of a decision, when there's a big decision between
I imagine
purchasing.
if we were to implement this policy, I mean, it's gonna be something, I've admittedly never done this before, which and these are the sort of reasons why I'm glad to work here and have a chance to work on these sort of initiatives. The way I would envision it working, and again, there might be some learning, growing pains along the way, but I would envision anything we have to go to bid out on, for example, like, when showing the bid prices to council, including the carbon pricing in that, for example. So like, let's say we had to bid, like a new HVAC system or something, if there was one option that's more efficient than another or something like that, factoring that into the price as opposed to just whatever the cheapest item would be. So that's the biggest place where I see it is with our infrastructure and with equipment purchases, as Councilmember McGreevy mentioned. When showing those bid prices, calculating as well this carbon shadow price and using that for comparison as well.
So it wouldn't, under this shadow pricing, it wouldn't affect the budget. It's just more information to have when you're making the decision on which thing to buy.
Right.
As long as, if it's not a burden on the staff at this time, I think it's fantastic to have that information available to council because we can just make more knowledgeable decisions, better decisions.
Yeah, I'm certainly willing to give it a try and see what sort of support ICLEI and the EAC can offer with it. And it could be something where we try it for a year and then I come back to council and be like, I just throw my hands up in the air.
Right.
But I'm certainly willing to give it a try and see how it goes and how it works and all that.
And maybe it's, I mean, actually just a thought is, maybe it only needs to be done when there's a major acquisition. So like, so it's a vehicle, it's a furnace, an HVAC system versus a heat pump, and like so that then you just ask ICLEI, you give them the proposal and say like, so what would this be with the carbon, calculating, and they would give that back and just provide that to council rather than even having it worked into the budget at least in the first year.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking anything that crosses the $11,500 threshold, which is the minimum kind of bid threshold.
Yeah.
Is what we would apply.
Yeah, I think that makes it, to make it more manageable for you in the office. And yeah, I mean, you could ease into this and there'll be trial and error.
Yeah.
And then we could see, what you think of it. Is it the kind of thing, do we need any sort of resolution from the council or is it?
No, I think it's something that I can just administratively start doing next year. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
So I'll reach out to ICLEI and confirm like what sort of support they can provide. And if someone could report back to the EAC and let them know that the borough is looking at doing this and we'll give it our best shot.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We want to thank the EAC for bringing this up.
Yes, it's a lot of work to put these proposals together. Okay, so we have very little time. We have the traffic concerns. We have 6 items now under that. Can we cluster any together or are there?
I think 3 of them we can handle pretty quickly. So I'll try to lightning round the 3 that I think we can. So unfortunately with the Sabine Avenue one-way traffic concern, the borough attempted to deploy the traffic counting equipment and it was immediately found that it was malfunctioning. So we actually, after trying to work with the vendor to repair it, the vendor finally told us we just have to send the unit back to them to repair and send back to us. It has been sent off and we hope we'll have to follow up with them to see when we'll get it back. And once we have it back, then we can redeploy it.
Right.
So unfortunately, I have no update on that one. On the request for a stop sign at Essex and Haverford, the borough engineer did go out and take a look at that one. To make a paragraph short, the borough engineer is not recommending that we do that. The borough engineer is recommending just continued, parking observation and enforcement as appropriate to protect the sight lines there. If the committee is okay with that recommendation. All right, and then for the concern about people speeding on Windsor Avenue, so my thanks to the police department for the traffic enforcement stops that the chief mentioned. And again, at some point I want to deploy the traffic counting equipment there to check speeds as well, but until it's repaired and we do Sabine, then we can bring it out to Windsor. So for now, the police thankfully have been stepping up as they do, to help keep an eye on traffic over there until we can get the equipment out there. Let's see here. So then that leaves us with 3 items and 4 minutes. So we have I'll just
and
read.
public comment.
Yeah, and public comment. So we have a complaint or a concern from the 500 block of Dudley. We have the one very recently filed, and I think the resident who actually filed that is on the Zoom here tonight. And then we have the concern raised by Mr. Bordeaux. So Mr. Chair, I leave it to your discretion how to handle those items.
We have someone here, so maybe we could address the 500 block first, and then we could go to Mr. Bordeaux.
Or I'm sorry, you mean the one for the person that's here?
Yeah, is that?
Oh, that's the Country Lane.
Oh, that's Country Lane. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so maybe we can take care of that one.
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
that. Okay.
All right, so I'll recap here. We have Elizabeth Brait with us. I don't know if Elizabeth, if you wish to say anything, you're certainly welcome to. I'll just note that earlier today, the work order that she filled out was shared with the committee. To summarize it, basically the concern is that when she attempts to leave Country Lane, it's difficult to see vehicles coming along Sabine Avenue. And so there's a request to either improve the sight line as well as to do something about vehicles speeding on Sabine Avenue, which is somewhat similar to the first Sabine complaint that I mentioned. So I would, for this one, given that there's a sightline issue, in addition to speeding, my recommendation would be to have the borough engineer look at the intersection and to look at the sight lines and those issues and figure out the best solution, whether it would be a mirror, whether it's parking enforcement, whether it's something else. And then again, when we have the speed counting equipment back out there, we can actually track the speed. But in the interim, the police can continue to do the good work they do with traffic enforcement on that one. Elizabeth, is there anything you'd like to add? Is that a good summary?
You articulated it very well. Thank you very much.
So is the committee comfortable with me having the borough traffic engineer take a look at the intersection there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could I add on something to that? Could they take a look at the Conway and Sabine intersection when they're there? Because it suffers from the same issues. I sometimes wonder if the no parking to corner signs are actually in the place where they should be, because the sight lines can be very bad there as well. So,
Yeah.
May I make one comment? So the problem for us is that it's on the left side as you're turning left. It's not going right. And so you can't see cars coming.
that's the same problem I have when I want to turn left from Conway on the Sabine.
That's what I figured. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
So we have no one else in public comment, right?
That's correct.
And we have maybe 30 seconds till the next meeting. I don't know, can we address the Dave Berto question?
What about the 500 block of Dudley?
Yeah, I think unfortunately, my recommendation as committee is we table both those items.
Okay, so maybe we could move those up to the front of the line for the next meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, thank you all. So that ends our meeting for November.
Thank you.